Hello and welcome back to the channel, where today we've got a slightly different video, because one thing that has always interested me is going back and checking out what systems had as their launch titles upon release in all the different regions, because we didn't always get the same games in every region, we didn't always get the same amount of games in every region, so it got me wondering what exactly were the Saturn launch titles in every region. And what I've done today is gone back, I've checked out the Japanese launch titles, the North American launch titles, and the PAL launch titles as well, and we're going to be taking a look at each one in order. We're going to be looking at those games and deciding what those games were like in terms of how well they harnessed the Saturn's ability to show what its technical prowess were, whether the games were suitable as launch titles, and what popularity that genre of game has in that said region. I'm going to score each one out of 10. We're going to add them up and get a total for each region and decide at the end of the day which region had the best launch lineup on the Sega Saturn. So the Japanese region saw 5 games at launch for the console, with the first one as taking a look at being Wanchai Connection, a text/full motion video based adventure style game which sees you taking on the role of a Hong Kong police officer as he tries to solve a murder mystery. That is quite literally all I can tell you about the game, because from my time playing it, I really didn't have any idea what was going on. But we're not reviewing the game, we're talking about these games and their suitability as launch titles. Now, this genre of game is relatively popular in Japan. I'd say the more dating sim style ones are more popular than this, but I think this game would still have quite a bit of popularity, so I'm going to give it 7 out of 10 in terms of region popularity. Now, in terms of suitability as this type of game as a launch title, is it going to bring people to the Saturn and say, yes, I want a Saturn because of this? No, it's not. And I'm only going to give it a 2 out of 10 in this regard. It wouldn't be my kind of go-to game if I was looking at a new system. Now, in terms of technical prowess, how well does it showcase what the Saturn can do? Well, the answer is not very well, because yes, the still images are of a higher quality than the previous generation, but the full motion video quality is not particularly good at all. So in terms of technical prowess, we're only going to give Wanchai Connection 2 out of 10, which means overall it scores 11 out of 30. So next up is Mahjong Goku Tenjiku. Hopefully I haven't butchered that. A release title that also came out on the PlayStation as well, and it features characters from the Journey to the West tales. If you don't know what that is, I suggest you look up Sayuki Journey West. It's a PlayStation 1 strategy RPG that is actually very good. I've actually played that game from start to finish, and it actually rivals, almost at least anyway, Final Fantasy Tactics in terms of its quality. In terms of this game though, I don't know how to play Mahjong, so trying to play this was very difficult. Now, in terms of region popularity, Mahjong is very, very popular in Japan. It's not the most popular board game out there, but it is very popular nonetheless. And also, puzzle games are very popular in Japan as well. So combining those two together, we're going to give Mahjong Goku Tenjiku 9 out of 10 for its region genre popularity. In terms of suitability as a launch title though, is it a game, like I said, for Wanchai Connection that's going to bring people to the system and say, yes, this is going to make me want to buy the new console? No. Much like Wanchai Connection, it doesn't have that draw, so it's only going to score 2 out of 10 in that regard. Now, in terms of technical prowess, showing what the Saturn can do, take a look at the screen. Do you think that looks like a technical showcase for a new system? Hell no. It's only going to get 1 out of 10 in this regard. There is nothing visually impressive at all here. This game could have easily been released on systems much older than the Saturn, so not particularly impressive in that regard. In terms of a total score, it is scoring 12 out of 30. So next up is another puzzle game, and it's also another game that saw release as a launch title on the PlayStation as well. I'm talking about Tama Adventurous Ball in Giddy Labyrinth. Yes, it has a very strange title, and it actually seems to be a pretty strange game overall from watching the introduction video. Now, I did have problems with this game because it wouldn't recognize my control pad whenever I tried to load this game, so I couldn't actually play it for myself, which doesn't really matter too much because I'm not reviewing the game. Now, with it being another puzzle game, they are very popular in Japan, and ball-based puzzle games, certainly from my experience from playing Shenmue and Shenmue 2, are very popular in Japan as well. So we're going to give it an 8 out of 10 for the region genre popularity. Now, in terms of suitability as a launch title, I think it's a slightly better suited game than the previous two games we looked at, simply because it tries to showcase a little bit of what the system can do. Now, I'm not saying that is particularly impressive, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So we're going to give it a 4 out of 10. It's not really the kind of game that I'd want to see specifically myself, but I think having something that little bit different when a console comes out is important. Now, in terms of technical prowess, yes, it's got some 3D graphics, but they're only flat shaded polygons. The game runs pretty slow with a low frame rate. It isn't very impressive whatsoever, but it's marginally more impressive than the previous two games. So we're going to give it 3 out of 10 in this regard, meaning Tama thus far is our highest scoring game with an overall rating of 15 out of 30. Now, moving on to our next title, and it is much more of a big hitting game because it is, of course, Myst, a game which after its release in 1993 on the PC became the best-selling PC game for around about the next decade and sold over 6 million copies worldwide on various formats. Basically, it's an interactive point-and-click game where you click on pre-rendered imagery, solve puzzles, and then you can travel to different worlds, which are known as ages, which reveal more of the backstory with the game's characters and help you make the choice of whom to aid. Now, in terms of this and its regional popularity, adventure games are very popular in Japan, only really bettered by fully blown RPGs, and the Saturn has got a few point-and-click style FMV games. So in this regard, Myst is a pretty good title for the region. We're going to give it 8 out of 10 for its region genre popularity. In terms of suitability as a launch title, like I said, this was a massively successful PC game, so it's going to score another good 8 out of 10 in this regard as well. Now, in terms of technical prowess, how well does it showcase what the Saturn does? Well, it shows you pre-rendered images that would be of higher quality than the previous generation systems, but that really is it. There is some full motion video in here as well, but there is nothing really that sort of wows you and blows you away. So we're going to give Myst a 4 out of 10 in this regard, meaning it actually scores a respectable 20 points in total. So moving on to the last, but by no means the least important, in fact it was the most important of the launch titles in Japan. Of course, I'm talking about Virtua Fighter, the conversion of the 1993 arcade game, which was indeed the first ever 3D fighter, a very important game at launch for the system. Now, in terms of popularity of fighting games in the Japanese region, they're not as popular as puzzle games, as RPGs or adventure games, so it's not going to quite score as well as Myst or Tama in this regard. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 because I still think they're relatively popular, just not quite up there with those other genres of games. But in terms of suitability as a launch title, I think fighting games are absolutely made to be launch titles on a system because the developers can focus on good quality backdrops, good quality character models, and they don't really have to worry about massive environments, so they have the potential to really showcase what a console can do. So in this regard, Virtua Fighter is going to score 10 out of 10 because it is well and truly suited to being a launch title for the system. Now, in terms of technical prowess, how well does it showcase what the Saturn can do? Well, we've got very basic 2D backdrops. We've got fairly low polygon count character models. It really doesn't showcase what the Saturn can do. And in fact, if you bought this and Tama as your release titles for the system, you would probably feel a little bit underwhelmed in terms of what the Saturn has to offer. But I'm not going to be too harsh on it because it has absolutely fantastic animations for all of those, and it's actually a fantastic playing fighting game despite looking quite basic. So in terms of technical prowess, we're going to give Virtua Fighter 5 out of 10, which means overall it is the highest ranked games out of the Japanese launch titles with a total score of 22 out of 30. So moving on to the North American release titles, and they were slightly luckier than the Japanese region because they got 6 titles at launch in comparison to Japan's 5, and that included the massive arcade hit Daytona USA. Now, I'm not going to talk about my personal opinions of Daytona. We're simply going to stick to the criteria for the video in terms of its region popularity, suitability for that kind of game as a launch title, and its technical prowess showcasing what it can do. In terms of its region genre popularity, this style of racing is incredibly popular in America. Muscle cars, NASCAR style racing, very, very popular. Now, racing games aren't the most popular genre of games in America, but they are still quite popular. So we're going to give it region genre popularity 8 out of 10. Now, in terms of suitability for racing games as launch titles, much like I said about Virtua Fighter, they are perfectly suited because they can showcase what the next gen system can do at high speeds with lots of cars on the track, trying to give lots of details on the trackside scenery and stuff. It really gives you an insight into what the console can potentially do. So 10 out of 10 is the only score that Daytona can get in this category. Now, in terms of technical prowess and how well it showcases what the Saturn can do, these were Daytona's flaws because it didn't have a consistent frame rate, lots of pop-up, and a bit glitchy as well. It didn't have a 2-player mode either, so I don't think it was a massive showcase for the system, so I'm only going to give it 5 out of 10 in this regard, which means that Daytona scores a very healthy 23 out of 30 overall. So moving on to the US version of Virtua Fighter next, and it's quite similar really to what I said about the Japanese version, with the main difference being the fact that fighting games in general are more popular in America. Fighting sports as well are incredibly popular, just like they were when Virtua Fighter came out. So I'm going to give Virtua Fighter 10 out of 10 in this regard. Now, the other scores are basically the same because these can't really change. In terms of suitability as a launch title, it's still 10 out of 10, like I said, for the reasons for the Japanese version, and technical prowess is still only a 5 out of 10 as well, which means Virtua Fighter scores 25 out of 30. So moving on to Clockwork Knight, and back in the mid-1990s, side-scrolling platformers were incredibly popular all over the world. Everybody knows how popular Mario and Sonic were, the Donkey Kong Country games that came out on the SNES. So for these reasons, I'm going to give Clockwork Knight, in terms of its regional genre popularity, 9 out of 10, because I think there would have been strong appeal for a game like this. In terms of Clockwork Knight's suitability as a launch title, it is very well suited to this. With it being a platformer, there's loads of scope for freedom in terms of creativity with the level design and special effects you can put into the game, so I feel the only score I can give Clockwork Knight in this regard is 10 out of 10. And last but not least, its technical prowess. How well does it showcase what the Saturn can do? And to be fair, it doesn't really do a whole lot in this regard. It's only a little bit better than games like Toy Story and Donkey Kong of the previous generation, so I do feel it was quite disappointing in this regard. Obviously, the game really wasn't finished. They had to release the second half of it as a separate game as well, so I don't really think it did the Saturn too many favors in showing off what it can do. So in that regard, we're going to give it a rather disappointing 4 out of 10, which overall means it scores 23 out of 30. So moving on to Pebble Beach Golf Links next, and it would be fair to say that golf is not my cup of tea, whether I'm on about the actual sport or a video game of the sport. And back in the mid-90s, golf wasn't really one of the most popular sports in the US, and golf games really in general weren't that popular. It wasn't until 10-15 years later with the Tiger Woods golf games where they really became much more popular. So in that regard, I'm only going to give Pebble Beach Golf Links a 5 out of 10 in terms of region genre popularity. Now, in terms of it being a suitable launch title, I don't really think golf games in general are suitable launch titles. You want the most popular sport for that region to be a launch title. So in terms of US or North American territories, you'd really want American football, maybe basketball and baseball up there, not golf. So in terms of suitability as a launch title, I'm only going to give it a 4 out of 10. Now, moving on to its technical prowess, does it showcase what the Saturn can do? Not really, in all fairness. We've got these digitized sprites, and I think whilst they look good in certain games, I don't think they look that good in this game. I don't really think this game is particularly impressive in any region in terms of harnessing the Saturn's potential. So we're only going to give it a 4 out of 10 in this regard, which means overall Pebble Beach Golf Links scores 13 out of 30. So moving on to Worldwide Soccer International Victory Goal next, as it is known in North America. And it would be fair to say that soccer is much more popular now in that region than it was back in 1995. You're far more likely nowadays to get big name players going over there to apply their trade than you were 30 years back. And it's for these reasons that I'm only going to give International Victory Goal a regional popularity score of 5 out of 10. Now, in terms of suitability as a launch title, whilst this isn't the most popular sport in America, I do think a multiplayer soccer game is much more suitable as a release title than a golf game. Yes, it's not American football. Yes, it's not baseball or basketball, but I think this is still a good launch title, even in the North American region. So I'm going to give it 7 out of 10 in this regard. Now, moving on to technical prowess, we've got very basic looking sprite-based players on a 3D pitch. So whilst it is more impressive than the football games, well, certainly most of them that came out in the previous generation, I still don't think it looks that great. So we're only going to give it a score of 5 out of 10 in this area, which means it has a total score of 17 out of 30. So moving on to our 6th and final North American launch title, Panzer Dragoon, a fully 3D shooter which really did give that next generation feel at the time. Obviously, the North American region was very lucky because PAL territories in Japan did not get this game at launch. So I imagine North American Saturn owners were probably beaming from ear to ear. Now, how popular were shooters in the mid-90s? It's very difficult to accurately check how popular any of the genres were back in the mid-90s, but I'm assuming shooters would have still had a good level of popularity back then. So I'm going to give it 7 out of 10 for region genre popularity. In terms of suitability as a launch title, a 3D shooter is a fantastic launch title. 10 out of 10 can be the only score that I give it because you've got so much scope and potential to do great levels of variety in all of the levels and showcase what a system can do with huge bosses. 10 out of 10 is the only score I can give it. In terms of technical prowess, how well did it showcase what the Saturn could do? We had infinite planes which looked impressive. We've got loads of 3D environments and enemies and obstacles for you to overcome. So I feel it really did do the Saturn justice, and I'm going to give it 9 out of 10 in that regard. I don't think I could give any of the launch titles 10 out of 10 for technical prowess because none of them could fully harness the system's potential back then, but I think Panzer Dragoon by far did the best job, which means overall Panzer Dragoon gets a fantastic score of 26 out of 30. So last of all, we're going to take a look at the PAL launch titles, and there were only 4 over here, and they were all games that we'd seen previously in the other regions. And for the sake of the video, I'm going to use PAL 50Hz footage just so you've got a better grasp of what we were dealing with over here. The first one we're taking a look at is Sega International Vitriol, and this is a great example of a game having completely different scores based on the region it's released in. Over here, soccer/football is the most popular sport in this territory by a long way. There's no other score that I can give this other than 10 out of 10 in region genre popularity. And in terms of suitability as a launch title, because of that, again, 10 out of 10. People always bought new football games back then, and there were so many on the market as well. It was so competitive in the mid-90s in terms of football games, and it carried on for a few more years, obviously, before it really just dwindled down to FIFA and Pro Evolution Soccer. So 10 out of 10 is the score there. In terms of technical prowess, it's the same score in that regard, 5 out of 10, meaning it has a fantastic score of 25 out of 30. So moving on to Clockwork Knight next, and before I mention the scores for this game, it's worth pointing out it was one of many PAL games not optimized at all, meaning it had big black borders top and bottom of the screen, and it had a squashed look as a result. Now, it wasn't just the Saturn that was prone to this, it was the PlayStation as well. In terms of scores, they're identical to the US version of the game. 9 out of 10 for popularity in the region, 10 out of 10 for suitability as a launch title, and 4 out of 10 in terms of technical prowess, giving us a total score of 23 out of 30. So our next launch title in the PAL region, Daytona, USA, is another example of a game very poorly optimized for the PAL region. I mean, just look at the size of those black borders. This game wasn't particularly good in the US region either. It had huge borders there, but they are really, really bad in the PAL region too. Now, in terms of its scores, this style of racing game is not the most popular style of racing game in this territory. Racing games are fairly popular in general now, and they were back in the mid-90s as well. So I'm still going to give it 7 out of 10 for region genre popularity. In terms of suitability as a launch title, like I said, racing games are amazing in this because they can showcase the potential of a system so much. 10 out of 10 is what it will get in that regard, but in terms of its technical prowess, it scores the same as the US version, 5 out of 10. I was actually tempted to knock a point off due to the fact the black borders on the PAL version are just inexcusably huge, but I'm not going to do that. I think it would be a little bit harsh. And overall, Daytona in the PAL region scores 22.
You're looking good.
So moving on to the very last game in the video, the PAL version of Virtua Fighter. Now, fighting games were very popular in the mid-90s over here, just like they were in North America. I don't think they were quite as popular though, so I'm going to give Virtua Fighter a 9 out of 10 for region genre popularity in the PAL region. The other scores though are simply going to match like for like with Japan and North America. 10 out of 10 for launch title suitability and 5 out of 10 for technical prowess, giving it a total score of 24 out of 30. Now, before we get on to an overall winner of sorts in this video, I think it's important that you take on board how I'm doing this video. I'm not reviewing each game overall and adding in how good they are into the actual scores. I'm almost taking a look at it as if I'm going into a store in 1994 or 1995. I can look at the back of the boxes. I can perhaps watch a preview video of some of the games, and I'm making my decisions based on that. It's not like we had YouTube readily available in the mid-90s and we could look up countless reviews of games and know everything about it before we purchased a game. So you really have to take on board that's how I'm doing this video. And of course, it's not a truly strict, really rigid format. I'm really just sort of judging the games on what I think region popularities were like at the time and trends in that regard as well. So I think you just have to take on board all of this when I come to my final decisions in a moment. Now, moving on to the all-important final scores, and there will be a few bonus points up for grabs as well. From their 5 games, the Japanese region scored a total of 80 points. From their 6 games, the North American region scored a total of 127 points. And from the 4 titles in the PAL region, the total for the PAL region was 94 points. Now, there are going to be a few more additional points for most multiplayer games that launch, with 5 more additional points going to the North American region because they had the most multiplayer games, a total of 3. There are also going to be 5 more additional bonus points for the best technical showpiece, which was Panzer Dragoon, and only the North American region had this, so the North American region is going to get another bonus 5 points, which means at the end the grand total sees the Japanese region with 80, the North American region with 137, and the PAL region with 94 points, meaning in my comparison, for all the release titles of all the regions at launch, the North American region comes out on top. Now, of course, these are just my thoughts, and they're not particularly strict. They're definitely not 100% factual and accurate in terms of the exact popularity of genres at this point in time. They're really just going on what I can find out and my own personal knowledge. Of course, like always though, if your opinions differ, if you've got your own opinions, if you think I'm right, let me know with a comment down below. It's one of these interesting things that I've thought about. Lots and lots of different consoles in terms of their launch titles and how they compared region to region. So I thought, with me having reviewed so many Saturn games by now, I thought it would be a good video to do for the Saturn. That is it for this week. Like always, I'll be back in the near future with some more Saturn reviews. Goodbye for now.